I went to the game last night, so I can't hear, and I'll probably lose my voice before it's over with. If you've not had the opportunity to see a night game at Neyland Stadium recently, it's worth the ticket. It helps that we're winning, but it's an amazing production that they put on. You know, there's something biblical about it too, to being a Vol fan, that whole part about wandering in the wilderness for you know, you get to halftime and you're eating up there and you're thinking, yeah, we could still lose it. It could still go south. You know, you can't believe it until it's already over with. But we had a good time. I want to thank the elders for the opportunity to speak. We need to keep Mitchell in our prayers as he's traveling. He went to Florida, you know, I guess it was 2 Sundays ago, and I can't remember now exactly because I was in Nashville last Sunday. I think it was 2 Sundays ago. One of his illustrations was diving in the river to find a stolen vehicle, and he was talking about the giant catfish and the alligator gars, and I should have told him, Gail, they got real alligators in Florida, you know. Yeah. But we'll keep Mitchell in our prayers. He's recertifying his rescue dive certification, and that's what he had to do this weekend. So we'll pray for his safe return, and I always thank Gayla and Mitchell for all their work with the church here, all that they do in the community and for our congregation. Well, tomorrow is Halloween, if you didn't know. And I know all the kids you've probably already been engaged in some trick-or-treating and trunk-or-treating and whatever's available out there. I remember when Seth and Avon were little, you know, once your kids grow up and have families of their own, it's all about the grandkids. You know, you're not taking your own little ones around to do that anymore, Terry, but the stuff with the grandkids is a whole new story. But when we were working at a church in East Tennessee, we took Seth and Avon out to go trick-or-treating on Halloween. Actually, it was on Halloween day itself. And like a lot of you do, I guess, we went to the homes of some of their friends, and then interspersed in there, we stopped at the homes of some of the church members that we knew well. And we wrapped up the evening by stopping at the home of one of the deacons that we knew real well. And again, I'm not going to name names. This may be recorded and it'll get back to somebody. But anyway, we knew them well. We went in. Of course, a lot of these stops, you know, you have some coffee or some hot chocolate or something, and we're eating snacks and stuff. The kids are getting their treats, and so it takes a while. Anyway, we wrap up there, and walking out the door, right next door to the deacon's house, there's the house of another church member. And I said, hey, you know, we're just right here. Literally, you walk across a patch of grass and you're at the next house. I said, let's just go over here and knock on their door, and we'll take this one in. The kids will have some more candy, and we'll call it a night. Well, as we looked up and started across the grassy patch, there were no lights on outside. There were no lights on inside. And Carol Ann said, you know, maybe we should just go on home. And I said, no. I said, if they find out we trick-or-treated at this house and we see them in church, they're going to be upset because we didn't, you know, hit their house. She said, but there's no lights on anywhere. It's dark. You know, probably nobody home. No, let's go. You know, I'm marching up the front steps. I start banging on the door and punching the doorbell. And Seth's got his bag out like this, looking up, you know, ready for the door to be open. And I bang some more on doorbell. Carol Ann, come on, nobody's home. I think so. Ring, ring, ring. Finally, the lady of the house opens the door and stands there in shock and says, what is the preacher doing trick-or-treating on Halloween? It's a satanic holiday. And I thought, oops. It didn't go too well. Seth's looking up like, where's the candy, Dad? I said, we're not going to get any candy here, bud. And that was quickly followed the next day by a call from the elders. And they were very understanding. They really were. They were trying to work this thing out, you know. So we got into a little conversation there in the church about, you know, the true meaning of Halloween. And all the rituals and all the things that tend to Halloween the way we celebrate it these days. Now, I have to go on the record and say I have no objections to the family fun of Halloween. I know there's a darker side and there's things you got to be careful about, but there's a lot of good that can come out of what we do and the way we do it as families today. But this sermon is not a defense of Halloween. It's not a defense of trunk or treat. It's kind of a backdrop for what I really want to say. One other incident that kind of brings, and I'll get to my point in just a minute. Like a lot of people, we traveled a lot this year, probably more than we've traveled in the last 3 years. And we were in an airport, and I wanted to go up to the kiosk and get some things before the plane boarded. I can't even remember what I was buying now, but I go up to the kiosk there, and the cashier's helping me. And the cashier looks like, sort of like a 25-year-old Ozzy Osbourne from his Black Sabbath days. And he had devil tattoos on his arms. He had black eyeliner all around his entire eye and fading down his cheek like this. Black hair. He had chains with pentagrams on the end of it, and bracelets that had the same thing. But he was real chatty. He didn't smile, but I mean, he talked the whole time. And I finally asked him about his, I said, what's with all the jewelry there? And he just looked up and said, well, I worship the Antichrist. I said, oh, okay. And he said, we meet every Saturday at 7 o'clock. And I said, well, I'm headed back to Nashville. I don't think I'll be able to make it, but, thanks for this. Just like, you invite somebody to the open house or whatever. I remember growing up, and people would see things like that, and we'd get all disturbed, upset. It would frighten people about, there's satanic worship, or, Halloween stands for this, or it stands for that. Now, obviously, if somebody opened up a satanic church down the street from us, we'd be disturbed about that. I get that. And here's where I'm going with the whole backdrop idea. If we're worried about the outward symbols of evil, I'm not saying we shouldn't be. If we're worried about the masks, the pagan rituals, the evil costumes, things like that, I would propose to you that we're afraid of the wrong things. And we don't really seriously understand how our adversary works. How does he really work? In Scripture, Satan, the word, Satan, is a transliteration itself. He's our adversary. That's what it means. Adversary, that it denominates what we call him, and it describes what he does. So what does he do? Well, his primary purpose, namely, is to oppose God and all that God represents and protects. He's the prince of evil. He's the adversary of God. He's the deceiver of people, often passing himself off as the angel of light. So, on the eve of All Hallows Eve, we need to take a more serious look at how Satan works in our lives. And if you're taking notes, first point's simple. Satan deceives. Satan deceives. While the result of Satan's work is scary, his process often is not. If everything the deceiver used against us repulsed us, or ran us off, or repelled us, there wouldn't be anybody to follow him. The path to destruction can be amazingly comfortable, friendly, and free. The true dangers in our lives, I sort of say in this world, just in our lives here, in what we do, in our own community, the true dangers in this world are usually not manifested in the pagan symbols, in the scary masks, and the heart-stopping costumes, and the horror movies, and things like that. Real danger lies in our own self-doubt. Real danger lies in our own lack of faith. Real danger lies in our own insecurities. Now, clarification, it's not evil to be insecure. It's not evil to doubt ourselves. That's not wrong. It's not sinful. I doubt myself often. Probably need to doubt myself more than I do sometimes. I have insecurities just like you have insecurities. But Satan uses those vulnerabilities. Satan uses those weaknesses to try to lure us away into places and things and relationships where we shouldn't be. So the real danger is in self-doubt, insecurities, our pride, our arrogance, all of which are exploited by Satan. The dangers lie in those things that soothe our anxieties. In other words, relationships that are innocent and things that are innocuous or commonplace in our lives, or in which we find security or validation or comfort, can be used by Satan, and the process is subtle. We're often in trouble before we even realize what's it, and before it's impossible or seemingly impossible to get out. He's not out there casting spells. He's not out there using unseen calamities to attack us, or trying to run us off with zombies or legions of dragons. But he tempts us and he destroys us through our own vulnerabilities, with everyday relationships, commonplace things in our lives, deluding us into thinking things like, no one loves me, no one appreciates me, or I deserve this, or I deserve that, you fill in the blank, or no one understands, or it's okay, I can fix it later, or no one will know, or I've waited so long, it's my turn now. You see, Satan will always dangle in front of us in a manner in which we often don't realize, and in a way in which we don't even understand what he's doing sometimes. But he will dangle in front of us exactly what we think will fill the need at that moment. Exactly what we think will fill the desire, satisfy the desire, what will calm the fear, what will soothe the anxiety, what will reinforce what sometimes our overconfidence. He's always there to fill the void in our life, whatever that may be. So it's that ultimately we think, yeah, this is what I needed. Or this is what's going to get me through. Or this is what was missing. When in reality it's not. It's what would destroy us. He's essentially in plain sight, if you know what to look for, in the form of something or someone very familiar. I started saying like the person next to you. No. But he's there. He's familiar. So more often than not, we fear the things or people regarding which or whom there is no rational or spiritual basis for fear. And we have no fear for those things that we should fear. Look in 1 Peter chapter 5. You guys know this verse, but I want to read a few more before it and after it. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Be sober, be vigilant. And why? Because who? Your adversary, Satan. It doesn't say Satan, it says the devil in the King James Version. Same thing. Your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. He says, discipline ourselves. Stay alert. How do we stay alert? What are we supposed to do? Well, I suggest several things. Prayer, reading. We're going to talk in a few minutes or look at James about looking into the perfect law of liberty, which is the gospel, God's word, as we compare those things to ourselves. But there's some other things we need to do. One thing that's really hard, I was having a conversation with our daughter Avon, and I can't remember if it was on the phone or in person. I just don't remember. I said something. Don't even remember what I said. And she made the comment, said, Dad, that's very self-aware of you. And I thought, I didn't know I could be self-aware. I don't even remember what we were talking about. But it's an important concept. How well do we really understand ourselves? You see, most people that are prideful, and I put myself in that same basket, we don't see the pride in our lives. We don't see the arrogance that we carry. Lots of times if we're struggling with anxieties and things, we don't see those. Now, we're great at picking out the weaknesses and the problems in other people. You know, we can see what's going on in the lives of others, rightfully or wrongfully, and we can criticize. Sometimes it's not criticism, sometimes it's concern, but we're good at picking that out in others. But we can't see what's in ourselves. It's hard to be self-aware, but we got to be. We got to be. We got to learn. And how do you see that? Well, one way is to hang around other Christians. It's one of the purposes of fellowship. You know, now fellowship can kind of be a nebulous, fuzzy word sometimes. What does that really mean? But we need those relationships. There's a lot of you in this room like I work with throughout the week. I see you outside of church. I see you in church. And you probably know me better than I think you know me. And it's easy when you have those kinds of relationships, we can pick up on each other when something's wrong. Maybe when we jump the tracks in our life a little bit, or something that's happened that we really don't want to talk about. You pick up on that stuff. You see, there's another side to this. Scripture talks about one of the duties we have as Christians is to, when somebody's, how do you put this, into a really sinful path or whatever, you've got to correct or try to turn them away or show them the error of their ways. Now, you got to be careful because that can lead to a lot of felonies, right? You don't, if you start confronting people all the time, there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. But there's a more effective way, and that is when you have that relationship, that friendship, that bond as Christians, and you enough so that you know. And we're there as examples for each other. That's why it's important to be in church. That's why it's important to do things with other Christians, have Christians in your life, so that there's a reflection back to you of who you are and how you're living and how you might need to adjust in what you're doing. It's important because if you don't understand what's wrong. You don't understand your weaknesses. I don't understand my weaknesses. Satan can take advantage of those things. There's another passage we're going to look at too, a little more in depth. Matthew chapter 10. And again, you've heard this one a lot. Could probably quote it. But if you start back in verse 25, Matthew 10:25, it is enough for the disciple that he be as his master and the servant as his Lord. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more shall they call them of his household? Fear them not, therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid and shall not be known. What I tell you in darkness, that speak ye in light, and what ye hear in the ear, that preach ye upon the housetops. And fear not them that kill the body, verse 28, but are not able to kill the what? The soul. But rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. That brings me to my second point. Satan deceives, but number two, Satan paralyzes. Satan paralyzes. The effect of fear is paralysis. But as Christians, we cannot afford to be neutral. So in Matthew 10:26-28 that we just read, the apostles were challenged by Jesus to openly proclaim and fearlessly proclaim his message. And the word fear occurs 3 times in there, verses 26, 28, and 31. Those who can merely bring physical death are not to be feared. I know I'd be afraid, but Jesus is trying to make a point here. God is the one who's able to destroy both soul and body. And in our battle with Satan and the forces of this world, we have to get off the fence. We're afraid. But you notice in these two passages, 1 Peter 5 and Matthew 10, it's not fear Satan, it's fear whom? God. What are we supposed to do with Satan? Jesus and Peter both say, resist him. Resist him. Maybe easier said than done. I get that. I'm kind of afraid of him personally, but he says, resist him. Resist him. Satan knows that if he can render us apathetic or paralyzed to what is happening around us, he has taken us out of the battle for the hearts and the souls of men and women. He sidelined us. And I think this is obvious in our culture today. It's obvious in the spiritual warfare that's going on in our nation today. We've been sidelined. We're afraid to be a witness. We're afraid to stick out because we're different because of the morality or the standards that we carry. We're afraid to speak where the Bible speaks. We're afraid to declare the good news about Christ. We're afraid to stand up in the face of rampant immorality. We're in our homes, we keep our heads down, and we don't say anything. We're co-opted by politics, we're co-opted by social media, we're painted into boxes from which we're afraid to escape. And kind of what God's telling his own apostles, who were likewise afraid of the Pharisees, afraid of the masses, afraid of the mob, afraid of what people would do to them, afraid of what people might think of them. He says, speak the truth. Resist Satan. Don't get painted into that box. We can escape man. We can hide from man. We might be able to fool man, but you can't escape God. You're not going to fool God. It's just this simple. This world is not our home. Our kingdom is far greater than the borders in which we live. Our king rules. Our king will judge. Our king will judge us. Our mission in this world is to love and to serve and to teach, and as James says, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep ourselves unspotted from the world. But the answer to all of this, if you go back to 1 Peter 5, is in the imperatives. It's in the imperatives. Like resist, James 4:7 and 1 Peter 5:9. Don't fear the devil, fear God, but resist the devil. But how do we do that? And the answer is in 1 Peter 5. When I was a little guy, maybe 5 or 6, 7, I don't know. It was one of those single-digit ages. They all run together now, if you can remember that far back. But my dad's, he's kind of like a Grizzly Adams type, you know. He loves to hunt, loves the outdoors. He's a guy that gets up at 3:30 in the morning to be out at his favorite hunting spot before the sun comes up, and he'll stay out until nightfall. Walk for miles and miles and miles. Loves the outdoors. So when I was a kid, and no surprise, we'd spend a lot of time in the woods. Dad would take us out. It's not like a hike going along a path. It was like walking off the side of a mountain and reappearing somewhere, 3 hours or 4 hours later, just through the woods. And I remember walking along one time, like I say, little guy, and all of a sudden from behind me, I hear him yell, "Stop." Just that. That was it. Stop. It scared me. I got to stop. Made my heart kind of jump. And his arm just fell right over my shoulder and pointed right in front of me. And 5 feet right out there in front of me was what? A little copperhead, coiled up in the autumn leaves. It was the fall of the year, like now. And you had all the leaves on the forest floor, the woods floor there. Pretty. Orange, yellow, red, all the various shades. And coiled up right in a little pile of them right there was a little copperhead. I didn't even see it. Walk 5 more feet, I would have stepped right into it. But the crazy thing is, immediately I was more afraid of him. At first, it was beautiful. The colors all together there, but perfectly camouflaged. Now, did my dad yell stop because he was mad at me? Or because I did something wrong? Or because he was trying to control me? Or he was being authoritarian? No. It was an imperative. It was a command. But it was done why? It was for my well-being. So I wouldn't get hurt. The same way that God speaks through Peter in 1 Peter chapter 5. If you look at, see where the best place to start right here. Go down to verse 9. Actually, I'm going to go to verse 6. We've read this already, but I want you to look at these verbs. I want you to look at the verbs. Verbs have moods. What is it? Indicative, imperative, subjunctive. Those are the 3 most common. There's 2 others. Interrogative and conditional, but these are imperatives. Verse 6. Watch these verbs. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God. Casting, verse 7. All your cares upon Him. Be what? Be sober. Be vigilant. Moving on down. Verse 9. Resist. Resist. He tells us also in Matthew, discipline yourselves, stay alert, remain steadfast, keep strong relationships. All those imperatives. Why do we do those things? Why are we supposed to do those things? Because He's trying to keep us from spiritual death. Number 3, Satan tempts. Satan tempts. Let me tell you something. The devil did not make you do it. You did it. We like to say that sometimes. The devil didn't make me do it. The devil didn't make you do it. We did it ourselves. But he's going to find those weaknesses. He's going to find the ways to tempt us, to draw us off. James chapter 1, verse 13. Let no man, when he says he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. That's verse 13, James chapter 1. But if every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust and enticed, and when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it's finished, bringeth forth what? Death. Death. That's the anatomy of temptation in verses 13 and 14. The bait's dangled before us. We look once, we look twice. We're like that big fish in the river, and we circle and circle, and eventually what do? Strike. He's got us. But he didn't strike for us. We did it. We did it. We need to remember that the consequences of sin are always worse, even in this life, than anything we thought we were trying to hide or avoid when we got into the mess to start with. He gets us to accept everything, including the consequences, is okay. Like it's not really going to be that bad, or I'm comfortable with this, or I've got this under control. No, you don't. Most of the time, I don't either. The hard thing is that it seems almost impossible to see the faults within us, as we talked about a minute ago, that Satan's going to exploit. And we get back to that self-awareness thing. James talks about, while you're still in James, look at James chapter 1, looking into the perfect law of liberty. How do we honestly evaluate ourselves? James chapter 1, verse 19, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Wherefore, lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive of meekness the engrafted word which is able to save your souls. But be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. For, and here we go, verse 23, if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man beholding himself, his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself, and he goeth his way, and he straightway forgets what manner of man he was. We forget who we are. We forget whose we are. We belong to God. We belong to our family. We belong to our church family. And we get out here and act like we're orphans. But, verse 25, if we look in the perfect law of liberty and continue therein, he being not a forgetful hearer but a doer of the word, this man shall be blessed indeed. What's the perfect law of liberty? Well, it's God's word. If we read the word, look into the word, evaluate ourselves according to the word, we're going to start figuring out what our weaknesses are and where Satan strikes. Last one. Satan sears our conscience. Satan sears our conscience. He finds several ways to sear our conscience and render us insensitive to sin and its consequences, okay? He uses suggestion, which is another way of saying temptation, to subtly draw us in. You know, most of us, when we get up in the morning, don't think, today I'm going to commit some premeditated act of sin and defy God. That's not usually how it works. Normally, we're like Peter when we deny and deny and deny, and all of a sudden our heart's stricken because we realize, oops, I did exactly what he said I was going to do, and I didn't intend to do that. What is it that Paul says? The things that I do not, and what I don't know to do. You're familiar with the verse? That's my life all over the place. Most of the time when we falter, we get in trouble, or we stumble, we know it's wrong. But somehow we got ensnared again. Adam and Eve. Eve did not wake up on that fateful day that she was tempted by Satan in the garden and say, today I intend to go down in history as the person who forever alters God's relationship with mankind. That's not how it started. That's not what she was thinking while she was eating her Cheerios that morning. But Satan got her, just like he can get me and you. But yet we're responsible. Satan sears our conscience. Satan uses suggestion against us or temptation. Satan softens his message. Our culture labels things to make them more acceptable, more comfortable, easier to accept. TV's full of that. And then sometimes, folks, he just outright subjects us directly to sin. At some point along the path, the fall to sin involves direct exposure. Hence why Paul says, what? 1 Thessalonians 5:22, abstain even from all what? Appearance of evil. Not just evil, all appearance of evil. Well, I'm going to conclude this just like Ecclesiastes does. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13, and you know this one too. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. What's the conclusion? Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. If you need some support and assistance fighting Satan, I know I do. But we're here for you. And we're glad to do all we can to help as a Christian family. If you come forward as we stand and sing.